They left her on the porch with nothing but a threadbare teddy bear and eyes too old for a 7-year-old. No goodbye. No warmth. Just silence. But out of that silence stepped a German shepherd, gray around the muzzle, limping from old wounds, eyes sharper than war. He didn't bark. He didn't flinch. He simply stood between the child and the cold world that had given up on both of them. What happened next would shatter every notion of what it means to protect, to heal, to belong. If you believe in second chances, in the quiet power of loyalty, and in love that doesn't need words, stay. Like, subscribe, and follow their journey. Because sometimes, the most broken souls build the strongest homes. A crisp autumn wind drifted down from the hills of Cedar Hollow, a small town nestled against the Vermont woods where time moved slower and silence clung to the trees like moss. Burnt orange and amber leaves tumbled down the winding roads, swirling across weathered porches and collecting in the corners of cracked sidewalks. The scent of chimney smoke and damp earth lingered in the air, a quiet reminder that the season was changing. At the far end of Maple Row, an old white 2-story house sat leaning slightly to one side, its paint peeling in long strips and its shutters sagging like tired eyelids. On the creaking porch, a small figure sat motionless. She was no more than 9. Lily Walker, with thin arms and knobby knees poking through worn-out jeans, sat hunched next to a scuffed pink suitcase. Her oversized sweater slid halfway over her hands, and a tattered teddy bear rested stiffly in her lap, held together with 2 mismatched buttons and more hope than stuffing. Her hair, brown, tangled, and half undone from a loose braid, hung like autumn vines around her face. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply sat, watching the wind. The low rumble of an approaching pickup truck broke the stillness. A dusty green vehicle pulled up in front of the old house and stopped, its engine coughing once before going silent. The driver's door opened with a long, reluctant creak. Tom Walker stepped out. 41 years old, lean and weathered by war, Tom carried the look of a man who had lived too many years in too short a time. His military-issued red duffel bag hung from one shoulder, and a faded camouflage jacket flapped open over a thin gray t-shirt. His boots were scuffed, his eyes shadowed but sharp. There were lines around his mouth now, deep, silent, and earned. And when he saw her, the war in him went quiet. Lily looked up. For a moment, her eyes barely moved. Then she tightened her grip on the teddy bear and blinked once, slowly, as if afraid it might be a dream. In the bed of the truck, a large German shepherd rose to his feet and jumped down with practiced ease. Shadow, Tom's retired K-9 partner, was 9 years old and bore the signs of a dog who had seen battle. His black and tan coat had thinned near his haunches, and a scar ran behind his right ear where shrapnel had once grazed him. Though his hind legs moved a bit stiffly from old injuries, his gait remained precise, and his amber eyes missed nothing. He trotted forward and, without command, positioned himself between Lily and the front door. Then the door swung open. Sandra Keller, 35, appeared in the doorway like a gust of cold wind. She was tall and thin, her posture slouched with a tired sort of elegance, like a curtain left half-hung. Her blonde hair was twisted into a messy bun, and she wore a loose tank top and faded leggings that hadn't seen fresh laundry in weeks. Her skin was pale, lips dry, and eyes rimmed with sleep or something heavier. Her voice cracked like glass. "I told you to stay out here. Don't even think about coming back in." She paused, narrowed her eyes at the girl, and added with a scoff. "Go on, wait for your dad to come fix this, if he even made it back alive after disappearing for years." Tom stepped forward from the tree line. Sandra flinched. For the briefest moment, something human flickered behind her eyes. Then her lips tightened. "You're back." "I am." "You should have called," she said, folding her arms tightly over her chest. "I did." "You didn't answer." A beat of silence. "I wasn't gonna leave her like this," she mumbled, glancing away. She was being impossible. "She doesn't listen." Lily remained still. Tom's boots crunched against the gravel as he climbed the steps. He moved slowly, not like a man confronting an enemy, but like one approaching a wound. When he reached the porch, Shadow shifted to the side. Tom knelt. "Hi, sweetheart." Lily didn't smile. Not exactly. But her eyes trembled. She leaned into him slowly, pressing her forehead against his shoulder. Her teddy bear slipped between them. Tom held her close. Tight. Protective. The suitcase tipped over with a hollow thud, unnoticed. Shadow sat beside them, alert but calm, his nose resting gently against Lily's foot. Sandra gave a single, exaggerated sigh, turned on her heel, and slammed the door. Tom stayed still, holding his daughter beneath the soft golden light. He could smell the faint traces of dust in her hair, of sunlight and autumn leaves, and something else, something fragile. "I've got you now," he whispered into her ear. Then he rose, picked up the pink suitcase, and walked with Lily and Shadow back to the truck. Not a word more was spoken. And yet everything had changed. The gravel crunched beneath the truck's tires as Tom turned onto Meadow Lane, the quiet road that led to the house his parents once called home. It sat on a small rise, surrounded by yellowing birch trees, the last of the summer green bleeding out under autumn's firm hand. The house itself was modest, a one-story wood cabin with a wraparound porch, its white siding dulled to ash gray with age, roof moss-lined, chimney leaning just slightly eastward like it had grown tired of standing straight. But for Tom, it was still home. Or at least, it would have to be. Lily sat silently in the passenger seat, her teddy bear clutched tight to her chest, her face turned toward the window as if watching the trees might stop time from moving. Shadow sat in the back, ears perked, watching his people. Tom stepped out first and circled around to open the door for his daughter. "This place," he said, trying to inject warmth into his voice, "was where your grandma made the best pumpkin pie in Vermont. I think the scent of it is still trapped in the walls." Lily didn't smile, but her eyes flickered. She stepped down carefully, still clutching her bear. Shadow trotted up beside her, pressing his body gently against her leg like a protective shadow brought to life. Tom unlocked the door. It creaked open to a scent he hadn't smelled in years, cedar wood, dust, and something faintly floral. The cabin was still arranged like his parents had left it, a living room with 2 armchairs and a sunken couch covered in a crocheted blanket, a small kitchen with cabinets in need of repainting, and a hallway that led to 2 bedrooms and a storage room. Tom placed the pink suitcase by the door and turned to see Lily standing just inside the threshold, unmoving. Shadow sat next to her, tail still. "You can pick your room," Tom said gently. "Or we can share one for a while. Whatever you need." Lily gave a small nod, then drifted after Shadow as he explored, tail sweeping low, nose sniffing furniture legs like he was reacquainting himself with old ghosts. They ended up in Tom's childhood room. He stripped off the dusty bedsheets, opened the windows, and let the cold air chase out the years. Lily stood near the bookshelf, her eyes lingering on the dusty spines, stories about forests, animals, and wartime heroes. He watched her as she traced the edges of one book with her fingertip, then picked it up and quietly sat cross-legged on the bed with it, Teddy still in her lap. Later that afternoon, Tom stepped out back to check the old storage shed, a place he hadn't been in since his father's funeral. The key stuck in the lock for a moment before turning with a groan. Inside, shadows stretched across boxes, tools, and forgotten furniture draped in cobwebs. He didn't know what he was looking for, maybe winter blankets, maybe paint. But what he found, stacked in an old biscuit tin under a tarp, stopped him cold. Letters. Stacked neatly, still in their envelopes. Some were unopened. Others had been torn at the corners. All addressed in a shaky child's hand. To Daddy. Tom sat on an overturned milk crate and began to read. The first letter was dated 4 years ago. Then another from 3 years ago. And another. Some had crayon doodles in the margins, stick figures of Lily with her teddy, or little flowers with smiley faces. One had a drawing of a house with 3 windows, and in the front yard, a man holding hands with a girl and a dog. He found more, not just letters, drawings, folded and wrinkled. One was a Father's Day card that said, "Come home soon. I'll be good forever." The back had a stain, maybe tears, maybe juice. Tom pressed the paper against his chest and closed his eyes. He hadn't known. He'd sent birthday cards, small toys, even recorded messages when he could. But the silence from home had made him assume Lily had forgotten him, or worse, moved on. Now, the truth sat in his lap like a weight he couldn't lift. That evening, Tom reheated canned soup while Lily sat with Shadow in the living room. She hadn't said a word since they arrived. She only traced lines on a pad of paper she found in the kitchen drawer, circles, clouds, shadows of things unnamed. Shadow lay with his chin on her lap, eyes closed but ears twitching, ever aware. As Tom brought out 2 bowls and some crackers, a soft knock sounded at the front door. He opened it to find Mrs. Edna Millstone, the neighbor from 2 houses down. A stout woman in her late 60s, she had wiry silver hair tied back with a blue bandana and wore a thick knitted cardigan dotted with small cat-shaped pins. "Well, I'll be," she said, squinting up at him. "Tom Walker, back from the dead." Tom smiled faintly. "Not quite dead. Just, elsewhere." Mrs. Edna had a dry kind of humor and an always busy energy, the kind that baked pies on Tuesdays and fed neighborhood strays on Thursdays. She handed him a pie wrapped in foil. "Apple cranberry. Welcome home. And that must be little Lily." She leaned to the side and waved kindly. "You've grown, honey." Lily nodded shyly from behind the doorframe. "She doesn't talk much," Tom explained softly. "She will," Edna said, patting his arm. "When the house feels like hers again. You both will." Before she left, she added, "That dog of yours, good instincts. Never liked Sandra, and I swear he growled every time she walked past." Tom chuckled. "He's smarter than most people I know." That night, after Lily fell asleep curled beside Shadow on the couch, Tom sat in the kitchen with a cup of instant coffee and all the letters spread across the table. The guilt gnawed at him in steady waves, but so did something else, resolve. He couldn't change the years lost. But he could rebuild from here. Not with grand speeches or promises, but with breakfasts made, walks taken, and quiet evenings that didn't end in slammed doors. As he turned out the kitchen light and walked past the living room, he paused. Shadow's eyes opened briefly to acknowledge him, then closed again. Lily stirred, then shifted in her sleep, one hand reaching across the dog's neck. Tom stood for a moment longer before whispering, "We'll make this a home again." The air had cooled further by the 3rd night, slipping quietly beneath door frames and rustling the hedges along Meadow Lane. Inside the cabin, the windows were fogged with Lily's soft breath as she lay curled beside Shadow on a blanket spread out near the hearth. Tom had lit a fire earlier, not so much for heat as for memory. It reminded him of nights long before duty had called, when home was still just a place with laughter and pancakes. Outside, the wind combed through the tall grass, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Around midnight, Shadow stirred. A soft growl hummed in his throat, low but unmistakable. His ears twitched. A moment later, he rose, padded to the back door, and let out a single warning bark, sharp, measured, and specific. Tom was already awake. Combat had trained him to sleep light and react faster than thought. He was in the hallway within seconds, bare feet against cold wood. His voice was low. "What is it, boy?" Shadow didn't move from the door. His eyes were fixed beyond the glass, body still, tail stiff. Tom flicked on the back light. It spilled over the porch, casting a golden hue across the yard. Movement. Near the shed. Small. Quick. Then gone. Tom slipped into his boots and jacket and opened the back door slowly, flashlight in hand. Shadow padded ahead, silent as mist. They rounded the edge of the garden, past the weathered compost bin and a stack of chopped firewood, and there, just beyond the garden fence, was a boy. He looked no older than 10. Thin frame, messy brown curls sticking out from under a wool cap. His oversized hoodie swallowed most of him, sleeves chewed at the cuffs. In one hand, he held a plastic grocery bag, in the other, a sandwich wrapped in foil. He froze when he saw the flashlight beam. "Don't run," Tom said calmly, stepping forward. "You're not in trouble." The boy hesitated, eyes darting between Tom and the dog. Shadow didn't growl this time. He merely stood, alert but unthreatening. Tom lowered the flashlight slightly. "What's your name?" "Caleb," the boy said, voice cracking. Tom exhaled slowly. "You live nearby?" Caleb nodded. "2 houses over. Blue one. With the broken mailbox." Tom recognized it, belonged to the Danvers family. A single mother and her 2 sons. Quiet folks. Kept to themselves. "What are you doing out here, Caleb?" The boy looked down at the bag in his hand, then back at the house. I just wanted to bring her something. Lily. From school. She used to not eat lunch." Tom's chest tightened. "Did she tell you that?" "No," Caleb shook his head. "But I noticed. And she always looked hungry. She sat by herself. Sometimes, she looked scared." Tom softened. "You're her classmate?" "Yeah. 3rd grade. Why come at night?" Caleb's eyes dropped. "I tried to come earlier. Your lights were off. I thought she might be asleep, but I didn't want her to go hungry again." Tom knelt beside him, his voice lower. "Thank you for caring, Caleb. That means more than you know." The boy looked unsure. "I can go now." "You don't have to sneak around anymore," Tom said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Come by the front door next time. Lily would like that." Caleb nodded shyly and ran off into the darkness, flashlight bobbing in his hoodie pocket. The next morning, Tom and Lily sat on the porch sipping cocoa. Shadow lay between them, head resting on Lily's foot like it had found its rightful place. Tom handed her the sandwich from the bag, still cool but wrapped tight. "A boy named Caleb left this for you." Lily blinked, then smiled, small, but real. Later that day, Tom walked down to the Danvers house, a modest 1-story painted cornflower blue with chipped paint and wind chimes tangled around the gutter. He knocked once. Twice. The door opened. Mary Ann Danvers, mid-30s, stood in the doorway wearing a flannel shirt and jeans stained at the knees. Her hair was tied back with a pencil through the bun, and her face bore the kind of tired that didn't sleep off easily. Her hazel eyes were wary but polite. "Can I help you?" "I'm Tom Walker. Lily's father." Mary Ann exhaled. "Ah. Caleb told me. Said he'd seen a soldier come back from the dead." Tom smiled. "Not quite dead. Just, reassigned." She chuckled faintly and invited him in. The house was cluttered, warm. A kettle hissed softly in the kitchen. The scent of cinnamon and old paper filled the space. 2 boys played a board game on the living room rug. Caleb looked up, surprised but not afraid. Tom gave him a small nod. "He's a good kid," Tom said to Mary Ann. "Kind, observant. Brave enough to sneak through my yard to bring my daughter a sandwich. I wanted to thank you." She looked down, flustered. "He's had to grow up fast. Their father's been gone a while." There was no bitterness in her tone, just quiet endurance. Tom nodded. "I understand that." They talked for a while, not long, but enough. About schools, teachers, the old days when Meadow Lane had community barbecues and kids left bikes in yards. before things got quiet. When Tom returned home, Lily was drawing at the kitchen table. She had sketched Shadow sleeping, his paws curled under him, a protective arch around a smaller figure, herself. That night, a warm pie from Mrs. Edna sat on the counter, untouched but ready. Shadow curled up at the foot of Lily's bed. And for the first time, the silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt shared. The days in Cedar Hollow had grown shorter, the wind brushing through the yellowed cornfields like whispers of things remembered but never said. By late afternoon, the sun dipped behind the ridge by 4, casting long shadows across the wooden porch where Lily now spent most of her time. It was here, under the faded blanket Tom had dug from a storage chest, that she sat cross-legged with a sketch pad in her lap and a mug of warm milk beside her. Shadow lay at her feet, head resting on his front paws, eyes closed but ears always tuned in her direction. The transformation in Lily was not loud or sudden. It was quiet, a shift in the angle of her shoulders, the way her chin no longer pointed at the floor when she spoke, and how her voice, when it did appear, carried a new softness laced with trust. It began with something simple, a trick. "Pa," she had said one afternoon, sitting on the rug with a dog biscuit in her hand. Shadow, curious, tilted his head. "Pa," she said again, lifting her own hand like a mirror. Shadow hesitated, then raised his right paw and gently placed it in hers. She laughed, not loud, but bright like a window cracking open for the first time in spring. Tom, watching from the doorway, smiled to himself. He hadn't heard her laugh like that since she was 4. Shadow became her shadow in every sense. He followed her from room to room, settled beside her during breakfast, and stationed himself by the bathroom door whenever she bathed. At night, when nightmares still laced the edges of her dreams, he climbed onto her bed and curled beside her like a living blanket, calming her trembles with a heartbeat older than hers but just as afraid of the dark. One Sunday morning, Tom sat on the porch steps polishing the blade of an old gardening hoe when Lily approached him, holding her sketch pad against her chest. "Can I show you something?" He looked up and nodded. She sat beside him and opened to a drawing of Shadow, mid-leap, mouth open in a playful growl. The lines were confident, almost animated, the fur inked with care, the eyes full of life. "This is really good," Tom said, genuinely impressed. "I want to draw stories," she murmured. "Like a book. With pictures. Just mine." Tom glanced down at her, then toward the field where Shadow chased a red ball Caleb had brought over the day before. "That sounds like a beautiful idea." Later that week, Tom brought out a worn metal box he hadn't opened in years. It sat beneath his bed, covered in a flannel sheet. He placed it on the kitchen table and flipped open the latches. Lily watched with curiosity as her father pulled out a folder labeled K9, Shadow. Inside were yellowed reports, faded photographs, and a tattered certificate with Shadow's paw print and rank. Tom laid the documents out carefully. Then he pointed to a photo, Shadow in full gear, standing beside a younger Tom in desert fatigues. Both looked lean, sharp, untouched by the kind of tired that lingers in the eyes. "This was taken right before our last deployment," Tom explained. "We were assigned to a compound in Ghazni. Shadow was the best explosives dog in our unit." "What happened?" Lily asked quietly. Tom hesitated. Then he turned to a folded paper near the bottom of the stack. "A field report. There was a roadside bomb," he said. "We were sweeping the area before a convoy came through. Shadow caught the scent, but it was too late. He pushed me back, took the worst of it himself. Shrapnel tore into his side and leg. The vet said he wouldn't walk again. They wanted to retire him immediately." Lily looked at the dog sleeping near the fireplace, his breathing even, back legs still bearing a slight limp. "But he did walk again," she said. Tom nodded. "Eventually. But he wasn't the same. They said he lost his edge. He wouldn't follow commands. Wouldn't eat much. Wouldn't sleep unless someone was touching him. They almost put him down. Lily's hand gripped the edge of the table. I fought for him, Tom added. Told them he saved my life. I owed him more than that. She looked at her father then, with something unreadable in her gaze. He saved mine too. The next morning, the house smelled of cinnamon. Mrs. Edna had dropped off a tray of muffins, and Lily had taken to warming them on the stove while Shadow kept guard beside her. When Tom returned from chopping wood, he found Lily drawing again, this time, a page that showed Shadow as a puppy, wearing a red scarf, sitting in front of a tiny girl with tangled hair and a crooked smile. He looks younger here, Tom observed. He's dreaming, Lily said. About before everything got scary. Tom nodded. We all have dreams like that sometimes. That night, a storm rolled in. Rain tapped against the windows and the trees groaned under the wind. But inside the cabin, it was warm and full of soft light. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch, her sketchpad beside her, Shadow's head resting across her lap. Tom watched from the hallway for a moment before turning off the kitchen lamp. In the quiet, he heard Shadow's breathing rise and fall, and Lily's small hand curl deeper into the dog's fur. It was not a perfect home. There were still moments when Lily flinched at sudden noises, or when she'd stare at her food too long before eating, like waiting for someone to snatch it away. But she was healing. And so was Shadow. And somewhere in the space between them, a child and a dog, both carrying wounds that didn't show, something whole was beginning again. The morning began like any other. A thin mist curled through the pines behind the cabin, wrapping itself around the fence posts and clinging to the damp earth. Inside, Lily sat at the kitchen table, sketching a scene of Shadow leaping through autumn leaves. Tom was fixing a loose drawer with a rusted screwdriver, whistling softly to a tune only he recognized. The air was calm. Familiar. Safe. Then the phone rang. Tom straightened. He rarely received calls, he had given his number to only a handful of people. The ringtone echoed strangely in the quiet house. Lily stopped sketching. Shadow, who had been dozing by the fireplace, stood up, ears erect, body tense. Tom glanced at the screen. Sandra Keller. A heaviness settled in his gut. He answered. Hello. There was a pause on the other end, then the voice, sharp, brittle, and laced with the smell of old perfume and new desperation. Tom. We need to talk. Sandra's voice hadn't changed. It still carried that clipped edge, like every word was meant to wound before it landed. Tom walked toward the back porch and closed the door behind him, stepping into the cold air. What do you want? I want to see Lily, she said quickly, too quickly. She's still my daughter. I deserve to see her. Tom exhaled through his nose. You kicked her out, Sandra. She was sitting on the porch with a stuffed bear when I came home. I was upset, she snapped. You disappeared for 7 years and left me to deal with everything. You had my number. You never answered. You never wrote. There was silence again, then a quieter voice, almost cracked. I've had a rough time lately. The rent's late. The power was shut off last week. I need her back. Tom's grip on the phone tightened. This isn't about Lily. This is about you. I'm her mother, Tom. You were. But that doesn't mean you still are. He hung up before she could reply. Inside the cabin, Lily had pressed herself against Shadow's side. The dog didn't move, but his muscles were taut beneath his thick coat, and he gave a low growl toward the door, as if he had heard the whole conversation through wood and wind. Tom sat beside his daughter, placed a hand gently on her back. She wants to see you, he said carefully. But only if you're okay with it. Lily didn't answer right away. Then she whispered, will you be there? Tom nodded. Every second. They met Sandra 2 days later at Valley Crest Park, a public space near the edge of town with rusted swings and a picnic area shaded by half-bare trees. It was neutral ground, open, visible. Tom chose it deliberately. Sandra was already there when they arrived. She wore a coat that looked expensive but tired, her heels clicking awkwardly on the pavement. Her lipstick was too bright, her smile too stiff. She held a paper bag in one hand, probably with snacks inside, the kind she never packed when Lily was home. Lily gripped Shadow's leash tightly. The dog stayed close to her side, watching every move with the focus of a trained soldier. "Lily!" Sandra chirped, stepping forward with arms open. The girl froze. Tom stood behind her. "Easy." Sandra's smile faltered. "You don't have to be afraid of me, honey. I just wanted to see you. Maybe we can go somewhere just the two of us. Grab a treat." Lily took a half-step back. Shadow moved with her, placing his body subtly between mother and child. Sandra's tone sharpened. "Oh, come on, Tom. Don't turn her into a scared little mouse." Shadow's growl rumbled through the space, deep and protective. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Sandra stepped back instinctively. Tom's voice was calm. "That's enough. I'm just trying to talk to my daughter," she snapped. "You don't raise your voice to her. Not anymore." Sandra looked from Tom to Lily to the dog, her expression twisted with something that hovered between rage and grief. "She's mine," she said softly. "You can't just take her away from me. She was never yours to hurt." Tom turned to Lily. "We're done here. You okay?" Lily nodded quickly, her grip on Shadow's leash steady. They left without another word. Sandra didn't follow. Later that night, Lily sat on the floor beside Shadow, brushing his fur with a soft comb. The television played low in the background, some black and white cartoon neither of them was watching. "Will she come back?" Lily asked suddenly. Tom looked up from the sink. "Maybe. But I won't let her hurt you. Ever again." Lily looked at Shadow, then back at her father. He knew she was angry. Tom nodded. "Dogs always know." She rested her cheek against Shadow's shoulder. "I didn't like her voice. It felt like before." Tom crouched down beside them. "You get to choose who's in your life now. You don't have to listen to voices that make you feel small." She thought about that. Then she said, "Shadow's voice is quiet. But I always hear it." Tom smiled. "That's the best kind of voice." The cabin settled into silence. The fire popped softly, and Shadow gave a low sigh, content and watchful. Lily fell asleep on the rug with her arms draped around the dog's neck, and Tom sat beside them, keeping his promise to never let the past walk through the door again. The cold of early winter had begun to settle into Cedar Hollow. Frost touched the windows in delicate veins each morning, and the wood stove in the Walker cabin burned longer each night. Tom had taken to chopping more firewood than usual, as though preparing not just for the weather, but for what lay ahead. The custody hearing was set for the second week of December. Tom had never imagined himself inside a courtroom fighting for something as sacred as his own daughter. But after Sandra's unannounced visit to the park, and the shift he'd seen in Lily's face afterward, he knew he couldn't wait for threats to return. He needed something official. Something that would protect Lily long after Shadow's growl had faded into memory. He hired Helen Mercer, a local attorney in her mid-40s known not for fiery courtroom dramatics but for her clarity and composure. Tall, slender, always dressed in clean, tailored wool coats and navy blouses, she carried herself like someone who had seen enough disappointment to never overpromise. Her dark hair was always tied back, and her expression rarely wavered from calm. Helen met with Tom at the cabin, arriving one frosted morning with a leather briefcase and a clipboard tucked under her arm. Lily, upon seeing her, had stiffened slightly, but relaxed once Shadow trotted over and sniffed Helen's shoes before returning to the rug. Shadow's quiet approval, as it turned out, would carry more weight than anyone could have predicted. "We'll need statements," Helen said after reviewing Tom's notes. "Neighbors, teachers, anyone who interacted with Lily before you took custody. The stronger the picture we paint of neglect, the better." Tom nodded, sliding a manila folder across the table. Inside were photos, dated letters, and a printed email from Mrs. Edna, who had already written a notarized testimony describing the many times she'd seen Lily alone, underfed, or frightened. There were also notes from Marianne Danvers, Caleb's mother, who detailed the night her son tried to sneak food to Lily. Most helpful of all was a short letter from Miss Caroline, Lily's former third-grade teacher, a patient woman with round glasses and a warm demeanor, stating that Lily had often come to school withdrawn, tired, and without lunch, and that her behavioral improvement since moving in with Tom had been nothing short of remarkable. And then there was Dr. Jules Hartley, the town's veterinarian and animal behaviorist, who had evaluated Shadow just weeks after the park incident. A tall man in his 60s with snow-white eyebrows and a permanent tan from years spent outdoors, Dr. Hartley had a quiet way with both people and animals. He had taken one look at Shadow's reaction when Sandra's name was mentioned and said, "He doesn't forget. Dogs imprint fear, same as scent. If he stiffens at a voice, there's a reason." Helen tucked that report into her file with care. "Shadow might be our most honest witness." The hearing took place in the county courthouse, a small brick building with peeling columns and a quiet courtroom that smelled faintly of dust and polished wood. Lily wore a light blue dress with her hair brushed straight. Shadow waited outside with a handler, calm but alert. Tom sat at the petitioner's table beside Helen, jaw clenched, heart steady. Sandra entered 10 minutes late, dressed in black from head to toe, as if in mourning. Her makeup was heavier than usual, eyes outlined in dark liner, lips a deep crimson. She walked like someone playing a part. Her attorney, Greg Baldwin, was new to town, young, well-dressed, but visibly nervous. The judge, Honorable Miriam Collier, was a woman in her late 50s with iron-gray hair clipped neatly at the jawline and a kind of no-nonsense gaze that had silenced many before they spoke. Her tone was brisk, but not unkind. Helen opened with calm precision, laying out the facts: Tom's military service and honorable discharge, the discovery of Lily abandoned on a porch, her medical and emotional state upon return, and the quiet, steady improvement since. She presented documents, letters, photos of Lily drawing beside the dog, playing with Caleb, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Sandra attempted to interrupt more than once, but Judge Collier held up her hand. "You will have your turn." When it came, Sandra's voice was shrill. She accused Tom of abandonment, claiming he had no right to show up and act like a hero. She claimed Lily had always been dramatic, that things weren't that bad, and that the dog was trained to attack. She produced nothing to support her words, only words. Greg Baldwin tried to pivot to sympathy, talking about Sandra's financial strain, the stress of parenting alone, but Judge Collier looked unmoved. Then Helen stood. "Your Honor, the dog in question, Shadow, has served with distinction in active duty and was evaluated by a professional behaviorist. His reactions to the respondent have been consistent and instinctive, aligning with other testimonies we've provided. We believe this is not only a matter of parental rights but of a child's psychological safety." Judge Collier was silent for a moment. Then she asked for Shadow to be brought in. The handler entered quietly. Shadow walked beside him without a leash. When Lily saw him, she smiled, not big, but full of recognition. Shadow walked directly to her side and sat. Then Sandra spoke. "Shadow." The dog stiffened. A deep growl rose from his chest, low and unbroken. He didn't lunge. He didn't bark. He simply stared at her, and in the silence, that sound filled the room with more clarity than any testimony could. Judge Collier leaned forward. "I've seen enough." She delivered the ruling 2 hours later, full custody awarded to Tom Walker. Sandra would have no unsupervised contact and must undergo a psychological evaluation before any future visitation would be considered. Sandra screamed, lunged briefly toward Lily, and had to be held back by the bailiff. Lily pressed her face into Shadow's fur. Tom stood behind them, unmoved. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall. The snow outside had begun to melt, giving way to the slow, muddy birth of spring. The wind no longer howled but whispered between the pines, and the skies above Cedar Hollow were often streaked with the soft gold of longer afternoons. In the Walker cabin, there was a quiet sense of something rebuilding, not rushed, but real. Tom stood in front of the bathroom mirror, buttoning a forest green shirt. His hair, a little longer now, was swept back. He still moved like a soldier, precise, economical, but there was a softness in his expression he hadn't carried before. Behind him on the dresser sat a folded letter offering him a position as an outdoor guide at Red Pines Wildlife Preserve, the local conservation center 15 miles west of town. The job was part-time but steady, and came with something more valuable than money: purpose. The woman who had hired him, Naomi Rivers, was a woman in her mid-50s with cropped gray-blonde hair and a voice that carried like gravel wrapped in silk. A widow herself, she ran the preserve with fierce dedication and the kind of quiet empathy that came only from having known deep loss. Slightly hunched from years in the field, Naomi wore cargo pants and fleece jackets year-round and was rarely seen without her dog, a retired herding mutt named June, with a limp in her back leg and a tongue that hung crookedly from her mouth. Tom had met Naomi during his volunteer days, helping clear out brush after winter storms. She'd watched how he moved through the forest, how Shadow stayed close without command, how Tom spoke to the children who visited. When the previous guide left, she called him in. "Kids listen to people who've seen things," Naomi had said, eyes narrowed as she watched Lily sketch quietly in the corner. "And dogs like Shadow, they don't follow fools." Shadow had quickly become a favorite among the visiting kids. He would sit calmly beside them during campfire stories and was known for gently nudging those who drifted too far during nature walks. Naomi began introducing him as our four-legged ranger, and made a laminated name tag for him that read, Shadow, K9 Emeritus. Lily, now enrolled in Cedar Hollow Elementary, had adjusted to the new school with a quiet courage that impressed even Tom. She still spoke in soft tones and preferred to listen rather than lead, but there was color in her cheeks and spark in her eyes, especially on Thursdays, the day her art club met. It was her favorite place in the world after home. The club was run by Mrs. Ellie Hargrave, a former art therapist in her 60s with wild silver curls and mismatched earrings, who believed that children spoke their truths best through brushstrokes. She wore long skirts and carried a tote bag filled with paints, and had a habit of calling everyone "my dears." The first day Lily joined, she simply handed her a blank canvas and said, "No rules here. Only stories." Lily's first painting was quiet at first glance, muted tones, soft shadows, but Tom had stared at it for a long time when she brought it home. It showed a cabin with smoke rising gently from the chimney. In front stood a tall figure in a soldier's stance and a large German shepherd, both facing a little girl who stood in the yard, smiling. The girl had her arms open wide and the sun behind her. "What's it called?" he had asked. Lily looked up. "Home." Tom had to turn away to blink back the burn behind his eyes. That weekend, Naomi invited the Walkers to a community gathering at the preserve. Nothing big, she promised, just neighbors, soup, and a bonfire. She knew Cedar Hollow still carried shadows for Tom, and she also knew that light only returned when people gathered around it. The gathering was held at the main lodge, a wide cabin nestled between tall trees with a fire pit out front and picnic benches made from reclaimed wood. Caleb and his mother came, along with Edna, now using a walker but still sharp-tongued, and even Miss Caroline, who brought her husband and their excitable golden retriever. Lily stayed close to Shadow at first, but then Caleb ran up and said, "Come see the baby goats," and suddenly, she was gone, her laughter floating through the trees like something being returned to the sky. Tom sat with Naomi on the back porch, sipping coffee from chipped mugs. "You did good," she said. He nodded. "Still a long way to go." Naomi smiled, slow and knowing. That's what trails are for. When the stars came out, Lily sat beside the fire, sketching by the flickering light. Tom watched her draw, watched the way she reached for different shades of blue and gold. Shadow lay at her feet, his head resting on her boot, his eyes half closed but always aware. It was late when they finally returned home. As Tom carried a sleeping Lily to bed, he paused in the hallway, watching her face soften into dreams. He pulled the blanket to her chin, then stepped back to find Shadow already waiting outside the door like a silent sentinel. He knelt beside the dog, running a hand over his thick neck. "Thank you," he whispered. Shadow didn't move, but his tail gave one slow thump against the floor. Outside, the snow had almost gone. Spring was not yet fully here, but in their little house at the edge of the forest, something new had begun. The first snow of the season came quietly, like a breath held between heartbeats. Cedar Hollow lay under a soft white hush as flakes drifted lazily past the windows of the Walker cabin. Smoke curled from the chimney, and inside, the scent of pine and cinnamon mingled with the sound of quiet jazz playing from a battered old radio on the kitchen shelf. Tom had spent the morning chopping wood, his breath fogging in the crisp air, his motion steady. Lily had been inside with Shadow, working on a new painting she refused to show him until it was finished. She sat cross-legged near the fireplace, her brow furrowed in concentration, and every so often, she'd reach down to pat the dog resting beside her, his aging frame curled protectively at her side. Everything in the house felt settled, lived in, warm. Until a knock came at the door. Shadow rose first. His ears perked, and a low huff escaped his throat, not quite a growl, but not welcoming either. Tom set down the mug he'd been rinsing and walked to the door, every step slow, deliberate. Outside stood Sandra. She was wrapped in a beige wool coat, the same one she'd worn in court, but now it looked too thin for the cold. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, but loose strands stuck to her cheeks where tears had already fallen. She clutched a scarf in one hand, and her eyes, rimmed red but resolute, met his with something like surrender. "Hi," she said, voice breaking. Tom stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "What do you want, Sandra?" "I just want to see her," she whispered. "Just once. No lawyers. No fights. I won't stay." Tom studied her for a long moment, then turned and knocked gently on the door. It opened slowly, and Lily peeked out. Her cheeks were flushed from the heat of the fire. Shadow stood next to her, tail swaying once, cautiously. "It's your choice," Tom said softly. Lily stepped outside without a word, pulling her coat tighter around her. She was taller now, her posture straighter, more certain. She no longer shrank from the world. She looked up at Sandra, then stepped to stand beside Shadow and took her father's hand. Sandra knelt slightly, still keeping distance. I don't know what to say," she began. "I've been thinking a lot. About what I did. And didn't do." Lily didn't flinch. Her voice, when it came, was steady and clear. "I'm not angry anymore." Sandra's lips trembled. "But I'm not going back," Lily continued, glancing at Shadow, then up at her dad. "I belong here. With the ones who stayed." The silence that followed wasn't cruel, it was honest. Sandra nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I understand," she said, and for the first time, it sounded like she meant it. She stepped back toward her car, pausing once to look over her shoulder. "She's strong," she whispered to Tom. "She always was," he replied. Sandra drove off without another word. That night, Lily and Shadow lay curled together on the rug in front of the fire. Her canvas, still unfinished, rested on an easel nearby. It showed a field of soft grass and a house in the distance, a silhouette of a girl and a dog in the foreground, both looking toward the horizon. The strokes were gentle but purposeful, every color chosen with care. Tom watched them from the rocking chair, the light from the hearth flickering across his face. On the wall above the mantel hung a new frame he had carved himself. Inside it, on simple cream paper, were Lily's words written in her careful handwriting. Home is where you are safe and seen. And in that moment, as the snow fell outside and the fire crackled beside them, there was no need for more. The journey had not erased the pain, but it had rewritten the ending. Together, they had made a place to come home to. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a girl, a soldier, and a dog. It was a quiet reminder that even in the coldest winters of life, grace still finds a way in. Through the loyalty of an old German shepherd, the steady hand of a father, and the forgiveness of a child, we are reminded that love, real, healing love, is never wasted, even when it takes years to come home. Perhaps it wasn't chance that brought them back together. Perhaps it was something greater. A gentle nudge from above. A silent prayer answered. Because sometimes, the most powerful miracles don't roar, they arrive in silence, with a wagging tail and a heart ready to stay. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment below, tell us what part touched you the most. And if you believe in the quiet work of God's hands in our everyday lives, write Amen in the comments to stand in faith with us. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and may God bless you and those you love.